wind was a razor, slicing through the pines with a mournful shriek. In a world of blinding white, two shadows moved with relentless purpose. They were K9s, military grade, but their search was now something more than a mission. It was a prayer, a desperate primal plea. And then they found him. Their soldier, their man, Sergeant John Rizzo, wasn't just lost. He was a captive of the cold, bound to a skeletal oak, his uniform a tattered flag of surrender against the unforgiving snow. What they did next wasn't in any training manual. It was a testament to a bond that death itself would have to fight to break. Before we begin, take a moment and comment your city below. It's always fascinating to see where everyone is tuning in from around the world. Now, let's dive in. Sergeant John Rizzo wasn't a man given to flights of fancy. His world was one of hard lines, clear objectives, and the unwavering loyalty of the two souls trotting at his side. Zeus, a sable German shepherd, was his rock. His steady, intelligent gaze missed nothing, and his presence was a silent promise of protection. Athena, a lithe and fiery Belgian Malinois, was his spear. She was all coiled energy and explosive power. Her devotion to Rizzo so fierce it was almost a physical force. Together, they were Unit Kilo 7, a trinity of soldier and dogs that had become a legend in the special operations community. Their bond wasn't forged in the sterile environment of a training facility. It was hammered into existence in the dust-choked streets of Kandahar, solidified during tense night raids in the mountains of the Hindu Kush, and annealed in the quiet moments between missions, where a shared look or a gentle nuzzle spoke volumes more than words ever could. Rizzo had raised them from pups, his hands the first to hold them, his voice the one that shaped their world. They had saved his life more times than he could count, sniffing out IEDs that would have vaporized him, and cornering insurgents who would have put a bullet in his back. But Rizzo was carrying more than the standard-issue weight of a soldier. He was haunted by a ghost, a memory from a mission gone wrong a year prior. A young private, a kid named Miller, fresh out of basic, had been under his command. A split-second decision, a bad call on Rizzo's part, had led to an ambush. Miller hadn't made it. The guilt was a cold, heavy stone in Rizzo's gut, a constant companion that whispered his failure in the dead of night. He saw Miller's face in the eyes of every new recruit, heard his last cry in the whistle of the wind. He'd requested this transfer to the remote mountains of a forgotten borderland, a place of snow and silence, hoping the cold would numb the fire of his regret. He'd brought Zeus and Athena with him, his only constants in a world that felt fractured and uncertain. Their current mission was, on the surface, a simple one: a long-range reconnaissance patrol to map out potential smuggling routes in the jagged, unforgiving peaks of the Altai Mountains. It was supposed to be a milk run, a 4-day trek through a pristine, if perilous, wilderness. The air was thin and bitingly cold, the landscape a breathtaking panorama of snow-dusted peaks and ancient forests. For the first 2 days, the silence was broken only by the crunch of their boots in the snow and the panting of the dogs. Rizzo, flanked by his two partners, felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time: peace. The vast emptiness of the landscape seemed to mirror the emptiness inside him, and for a few precious moments, he could almost breathe again. He'd watch Zeus, his noble head held high, testing the wind, his movements economical and precise. Then his gaze would shift to Athena, her body a taut spring of anticipation, her ears swiveling to catch the faintest sound. They were an extension of him, his eyes, his ears, his instincts given form. He'd often talk to them, his voice a low murmur against the wind. "See that ridge, Zeus? Bet you could spot a field mouse from here." Or, "Easy, girl," to Athena when her hackles would rise at the snap of a distant twig. They would respond with a flick of an ear, a soft whine, or a reassuring press of their body against his leg. They were his pack, his family, the only ones who knew the man behind the uniform, the one who carried the weight of a ghost on his shoulders. On the 3rd day, the sky began to change. The brilliant crystalline blue bled into a bruised, ominous gray. The wind, once a playful whisper, began to howl, a predator stalking them through the trees. A blizzard was coming, a white monster of a storm that would swallow the mountains whole. The mission parameters were clear. In the event of extreme weather, find shelter and wait it out. They were making their way to a pre-designated extraction point, a small clearing on the leeward side of a massive ridge, when the world exploded. It wasn't the roar of the wind or the crack of thunder. It was the sharp, unmistakable report of a high-caliber rifle, followed by the sickening thud of a bullet hitting flesh. One of the two other soldiers in his small detachment cried out and crumpled to the ground. The pristine snow around him instantly blossomed into a grotesque crimson flower. The ambush was brutally efficient, a storm of bullets from an unseen enemy hidden in the dense tree line. The world dissolved into a chaotic ballet of muzzle flashes, shouting, and the terrified whines of the dogs. Rizzo reacted on pure instinct, years of training taking over. He returned fire, laying down a suppressing barrage while dragging his wounded comrade behind the meager cover of a fallen log. Zeus and Athena were a whirlwind of controlled fury at his side, barking and snarling, their aggression a shield against the unseen threat. But they were outnumbered, outgunned, and pinned down. The blizzard, in its full, raging fury, descended upon them, a curtain of white that blinded them, choked them, and isolated them in a frozen hell. The firefight was short and vicious. Another soldier went down, his life extinguished in a heartbeat. Rizzo felt a searing pain in his shoulder as a bullet tore through muscle and bone. His rifle clattered from his numb fingers. Through the swirling snow, he saw figures emerge from the trees, clad in winter camouflage, their faces obscured by masks. They moved with a chilling proficiency, their weapons trained on him. He reached for his sidearm, but a brutal kick to his ribs sent him gasping to the ground. As darkness encroached on the edge of his vision, the last thing he saw was Athena launching herself at one of the attackers, a flash of teeth and fury. Then a rifle butt slammed into the side of his head, and the world went black. He was adrift in a sea of pain and confusion, the roar of the blizzard and the desperate barking of his dogs the only anchors to a reality that was slipping through his fingers. He had failed again. Another team, another life lost under his command. The ghost of Private Miller whispered his name, its voice now one with the howling wind. And in the heart of the storm, Sergeant John Rizzo, the man who had survived so much, was dragged away, his two loyal partners swallowed by the white chaos, their fates unknown. The setup was complete. The conflict had just begun. The whiteout was absolute. For Zeus and Athena, the world had been reduced to a roaring, biting chaos. One moment, their man, their alpha, their entire world was there, fighting beside them. The next, he was gone, swallowed by the storm and the shadowy figures that had emerged from it. They had been driven back by the sheer ferocity of the blizzard, the snow so thick it was like drowning in frozen air. Athena's side throbbed where a glancing blow from a rifle butt had caught her, but the pain was a distant echo compared to the screaming void left by Rizzo's absence. They were lost, disoriented. The familiar scents of pine, snow, and their human comrades were scoured from the air by the gale. All that remained was the smell of cordite, blood, and a terrifying, overwhelming emptiness. For a time, they huddled together in the lee of a snow-blasted rock formation, two shivering, miserable creatures against the fury of the mountain. Zeus, ever the stoic, pressed his body against Athena's, shielding her from the worst of the wind, licking the shallow gash on her flank. Athena, usually so fiery, was subdued, her whine swallowed by the storm. Her amber eyes scanned the impenetrable wall of white, searching for a sign, a scent, anything. Their training was a deep-seated instinct, a set of rules for a world that had rules. But this was different. This wasn't a search for a hidden explosive or a fleeing suspect. This was a search for a missing part of their own soul. As the hours bled into one another and the storm raged on, their military conditioning began to merge with something far older, far more primal. The drive to find their pack leader. When the blizzard finally broke, it revealed a world transformed. The landscape was a pristine, trackless expanse of white, the sun a pale, watery disk in a washed-out sky. The silence was as profound as the storm's fury had been. But for Zeus and Athena, the world was no longer silent. Their noses, exquisitely sensitive instruments, began to sift through the frozen air. Faintly, almost imperceptibly, they found it. A ghost of a scent, trampled and faded, but unmistakable. The scent of Rizzo's captors, mingled with the metallic tang of his blood. The hunt began. It was a brutal, unforgiving journey. Their paws, tough as they were, cracked and bled on the icy crust of the snow. Hunger was a gnawing beast in their bellies. They survived on what they could find: a frozen rabbit dug out from its burrow, the scraps of a carcass left by wolves. They encountered those same wolves one evening, a gaunt, shadowy pack that saw them not as fellow canines, but as rivals. The standoff was tense, a silent negotiation of growls and bared teeth. It was Zeus's calm, unwavering authority, and Athena's explosive, unpredictable aggression that made the wolves back down, melting back into the twilight. Their bond, always strong, was now their most vital survival tool. They moved as one, thought as one, two halves of a single, determined whole. Meanwhile, John Rizzo woke to darkness and the throbbing symphony of pain. His head felt like it had been split open. His shoulder was a ball of fire, and every breath was a fresh agony in his bruised ribs. He was in a small, crude hut, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, stale smoke, and damp earth. His hands were bound tightly behind his back, his feet tied at the ankles. A figure emerged from the shadows, a lantern casting his face in a grotesque, flickering light. The man was grizzled, his face a roadmap of hard living, his eyes as cold and gray as the mountain granite. He moved with the coiled economic grace of a predator. "Sergeant John Rizzo," the man said, his voice a low rumble. He spoke English with a thick Slavic accent. "The famous K9 handler. I have heard stories." Rizzo said nothing, his mind struggling to cut through the fog of pain and concussion. "My name is Kale," the man continued, circling him slowly. "And you and I, we have a history." Kale stopped in front of him, crouching down. "A year ago, a valley in the Kush, a young American private, name of Miller." Rizzo's blood ran cold. The ghost he had tried to outrun had found him here, in this frozen wasteland. "You made a bad call, Sergeant," Kale hissed, his face inches from Rizzo's. "You led your men into a trap. My men. I lost 2 brothers that day because of your incompetence." The truth was a punch to the gut. This wasn't a random ambush. This was revenge. The days that followed were a blur of torment. Kale was a master of psychological warfare. He didn't just want information about patrol routes or base locations. He wanted to shatter Rizzo's spirit. He would withhold water, then offer it while describing in vivid detail the moment Private Miller had died. He would taunt Rizzo with his failure, twisting the knife of his guilt until it felt like there was nothing left inside him but shame and regret. "He was just a boy," Kale would whisper, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "He trusted you. He looked up to you. And you led him to his slaughter." Rizzo's training screamed at him to resist, to build walls in his mind, to give them nothing. But Kale wasn't trying to break down walls. He was poisoning the foundation. Rizzo's own guilt was the weapon Kale used against him. In the long, dark hours, the face of Private Miller would float in his vision, his eyes wide with terror and accusation. The whispers of the ghost became Kale's voice. His only escape was the thought of his dogs. He prayed they were alive. He pictured them, Zeus's steady gaze, Athena's boundless energy. They were his anchor, a symbol of something pure and good in a world that had become a living hell. He would focus on their image, on the memory of their warmth, on the sound of their panting as they ran beside him. They were his pack, and the thought of them, lost in the wilderness, was a pain that eclipsed even the agony of his wounds and the torment of his guilt. He had to survive, for them. He had to believe they were fighting to find him, just as he was fighting to hold on for them. Days of relentless tracking had taken their toll. Zeus and Athena were gaunt, their ribs stark beneath their thick coats. The pads of their paws were raw, but they pushed on, driven by a scent that grew stronger with every agonizing step. Finally, they found it. Tucked into a narrow, snow-choked ravine, so cleverly concealed it was almost a part of the mountain itself, was the captor's hideout. A plume of smoke, thin and gray, was the only sign of life. They settled on a high ridge overlooking the camp, hidden amongst a stand of snow-heavy firs. They were weak, exhausted, and painfully aware that a direct assault would be suicide. The camp held at least 3 men, all armed, all dangerous. For the first time since the hunt began, a conflict arose between the 2 dogs. Athena, her fiery spirit undimmed by hunger and fatigue, was a coiled spring of frustration. Her entire being screamed to charge down the slope, a whirlwind of teeth and fury, and tear their man back from the enemy. She would whine softly, her muscles trembling, her eyes fixed on the hut. Zeus, however, was the strategist. He laid his head on his paws, his intelligent eyes missing nothing. He watched the routine of the camp, the way the men came and went, the changing of the guard. He knew that brute force would fail. They had to be smarter. He would nudge Athena with his nose, a quiet command to be patient, to wait. His calm, steady presence was a necessary anchor for her explosive energy. Down in the camp, Rizzo's world was shrinking to the four walls of the hut and the face of his tormentor. But something was shifting. Kale, in his arrogance, was becoming careless. He saw Rizzo as a broken man, a trophy of his revenge. "You think your guilt is so special, American?" Kale sneered one afternoon, tossing a piece of dried meat onto the dirt floor in front of Rizzo. "You mourn your one little soldier, the operation you blundered into. It was a cleanup. My government needed to erase a mistake, a weapons deal gone wrong. Your Private Miller wasn't the target. You were just the janitors, sent to sweep up a mess you knew nothing about." The words hit Rizzo with the force of a physical blow, but not in the way Kale intended. It wasn't just a bad call. It wasn't just his failure. They were set up. The intel had been deliberately flawed. They had been sent in as sacrificial lambs. The guilt that had crippled him for a year didn't vanish, but it was suddenly joined by a new, searing emotion: rage. A cold, clear rage that burned away the fog of despair. He wasn't just a failure, he was a pawn, and he would not be a pawn any longer. It was then, in that moment of terrible clarity, that he heard it. A sound so faint on the wind, he thought his mind was finally breaking. A high, sharp bark. He froze, his head cocked. Was it a wolf? A fox? Then he heard it again. Lower this time. A sound he would know anywhere on earth. The deep, resonant woof of a German shepherd. Zeus. He squeezed his eyes shut, convinced it was a hallucination, a desperate trick of a mind starved of hope. But the sound came a third time, a clear, deliberate signal carried on the frozen air. Hope, so long a stranger, flooded him with a force that made him gasp. It was real. They were alive. They had come for him. His despair didn't just recede, it was annihilated. The ghost of Private Miller was still there, but his voice was now a call for justice, not a whisper of failure. A plan began to form in Rizzo's mind, a desperate, razor-thin gamble. He looked at the routine of the camp, at the single guard who would often tie him to a tree outside the hut for a few minutes of fresh air, and he saw not just his prison, but his opportunity. The turning point had arrived. His pack was here, and the hunt was about to be reversed. The air was so cold it felt like breathing shards of glass. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world of brutal, beautiful stillness. Just as Zeus had observed, a lone guard, a young, nervous man with shifty eyes, hauled Rizzo from the hut and roughly tied him to the gnarled, leafless oak at the edge of the small clearing. The rope bit into his raw wrists. This was it. The window of opportunity was open. "Your boss is a fool," Rizzo said, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. The guard flinched, startled. "Shut up, American," the guard muttered, avoiding his eyes. "He's lying to you," Rizzo pressed, his gaze intense. "He told you this was about revenge for his fallen comrades, didn't he? Ask him about the weapons deal. Ask him why he was really there that day." Rizzo was weaving the truth Kale had so arrogantly given him into a weapon, planting seeds of doubt, creating a distraction. The guard's face tightened. "I said, shut up!" He took a step closer to Rizzo, his attention now completely focused on the prisoner. It was the opening they had been waiting for. From the ridge above, two shadows detached themselves from the darkness of the firs. Zeus, executing the plan, broke to the left, a silent, dark shape against the snow. He let out a single, booming bark, a sound that echoed through the ravine like a rifle shot. From inside the hut came a startled shout, the sound of a chair scraping back. The diversion was working. At the same instant, Athena launched herself down the slope. She was not a charging beast, but a silent, fluid projectile. She didn't make a sound, her paws barely disturbing the snow. The guard, his head turned toward the sound of Zeus's bark, never saw her coming. She hit him low and hard, a blur of muscle and teeth, her jaws closing on his gun arm. The man screamed, a high, thin sound of shock and pain, as his rifle flew from his grasp and landed in the snow. Athena didn't let go, her body a knot of controlled fury, disabling him with brutal efficiency. The next moment, they were on Rizzo, a frantic, joyous whirlwind of wet noses, warm tongues, and desperate whines. "Hey, hey, I know," Rizzo choked out, tears freezing on his cheeks. "I missed you too." The reunion was a supernova of emotion, but there was no time. Zeus was already at his hands, his powerful jaws gnawing at the thick rope. The door of the hut burst open. Kale and the other mercenaries spilled out, weapons raised. "What the—" Kale's shout died in his throat as he took in the scene. His guard on the ground, the prisoner's dogs, the prisoner himself just moments from being free. The world erupted into chaos. Kyle opened fire, bullets thudding into the oak tree around Rizzo's head. Just as the rope gave way, Rizzo lunged, grabbing the fallen guard's rifle. He was weak, his shoulders screamed in protest, but adrenaline and a year of suppressed rage were a potent fuel. He laid down a spray of covering fire as his pack scrambled for the trees. "Go! Go!" he yelled, his voice raw. It was a desperate running battle through the forest. Kale and his man were in hot pursuit, their bullets splintering the trees around them. But here, in the wilderness, the advantage shifted. This was the dog's world. Rizzo was no longer just a soldier. He was the alpha of a pack fighting for its life. He would shout a command, and they would respond instantly. "Athena, left flank!" And she would peel off, a silent menace drawing their fire. "Zeus, with me!" And the big shepherd would be at his side, a loyal, snarling bodyguard. They were cornered at the edge of a deep, snow-filled ravine. It was a dead end. Kale and his man closed in, their faces grim masks of determination. "Nowhere left to run, Rizzo!" Kale yelled, his rifle leveled at Rizzo's chest. "You should have died in that valley." "You lied!" Rizzo shouted back, his voice echoing in the cold air. "It was never about your men. It was about a dirty deal you needed to bury." Kale's face contorted with fury. He raised his rifle to fire. In that split second, as the muzzle flashed, Athena did what she was trained to do. Protect her handler. She launched herself through the air, a streak of fawn and black, not at Kale, but at Rizzo, knocking him aside. The bullet, meant for Rizzo's heart, tore through her shoulder. She let out a pained yelp and crumpled to the snow, her leg folding beneath her at an unnatural angle. A primal roar of rage erupted from Rizzo's throat. Seeing Athena fall, seeing the blood spreading on the white snow, broke something inside him. At the same moment, Zeus, with a snarl that seemed to come from the very earth, launched himself at the second mercenary, a force of pure, protective fury. In the chaos, Rizzo charged Kale. It wasn't a soldier's attack, it was a wild, desperate assault. He slammed into Kale, and the two men went down, grappling in the snow at the very edge of the ravine. Kale was stronger, but Rizzo was fueled by a grief and rage that made him invincible. As they struggled, Rizzo saw Kale's eyes widen in pain. He glanced down and saw Zeus, having dealt with his opponent, now latched onto Kale's leg. With a final desperate heave, Rizzo pushed. Kale, off balance and screaming, toppled backward over the edge, his scream fading as he disappeared into the white depths of the ravine. The forest fell silent. The only sounds were the ragged gasps of Rizzo's breathing and the soft, pained whimpers of the dog who had just saved his life. The silence that followed the storm of violence was heavy and absolute. Rizzo scrambled to Athena's side. The snow around her was stained a horrifying, brilliant crimson. Her breathing was shallow, her beautiful, intelligent eyes clouded with pain. He gently touched the wound, his fingers coming away slick and warm. The bullet had gone clean through, but it had shattered bone. "It's okay, girl. It's okay," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. He tore strips from his own uniform, using his limited field medical training to pack the wound and fashion a crude pressure bandage. "You're going to be okay." Zeus limped over, his own leg bleeding from a shallow graze. He nudged Athena's still form with his nose, then looked at Rizzo, a low, mournful whine escaping his throat. He stood a stoic, trembling guard over his fallen partner, a sentinel of grief and loyalty. Rizzo knew they wouldn't last long here. The cold was a relentless enemy, and Athena needed immediate expert medical attention. He stumbled back to where Kale's man had fallen and found a radio. His fingers, numb with cold and slick with blood, fumbled with the dials. He sent out a distress call, his voice cracking, repeating his name, rank, and a desperate plea for assistance, giving the coordinates he could only guess at. He had no idea if anyone was listening, if the signal could even penetrate the deep valleys. Then there was nothing to do but wait. He dragged Athena's limp body into the slight shelter of an overhanging rock, pulling Zeus close. He huddled between his two dogs, a man trying to shield his family with his own body. He shared his warmth, whispering endless promises to Athena, stroking Zeus's noble head, telling him over and over what a good boy he was. In that frozen crucible, the last vestiges of the haunted soldier melted away, leaving only a man, a father, clinging to his children. He wasn't thinking about medals or missions. He was thinking only of the steady, precious rise and fall of their chests against his. Hours crawled by. The sun began to sink, painting the snow in hues of orange and purple. Despair, a cold and familiar enemy, began to creep back in. And then he heard it. Faint at first, then growing steadily stronger. The rhythmic whump, whump, whump of helicopter blades. Rescue. As the Special Forces medics rappelled down, they found a strange and moving tableau, a battered, bleeding soldier, refusing to be treated until they looked at his dogs. He wouldn't let go of Athena as they loaded her onto the stretcher, his hand resting on her side, his face a mask of fierce, protective love. The medics, men who had seen the worst of humanity, saw the bond, the raw, unspoken devotion, and they understood. The flight back to the base was a blur. The wait during Athena's emergency surgery was the longest, most agonizing period of Rizzo's life. Zeus refused to leave his side, his head resting on Rizzo's knee, a silent, comforting wait. The information Rizzo had recovered, taken from the radio and Kale's maps, proved to be a bombshell. It exposed a deep-seated conspiracy, preventing a conflict that would have cost countless lives. He was debriefed, commended, hailed as a hero. But the words were hollow. The praise distant noise. His true reward, the only commendation he cared about, came from the base veterinarian. "She's a fighter, Sergeant," the vet said, a tired but genuine smile on her face. "The surgery was complex. She lost a lot of blood and we had to take the leg, but she's going to make it. She's going to live." The final scene isn't on a battlefield or in a briefing room. It's weeks later, in a quiet, sun-drenched field behind the base hospital. John Rizzo, his arm in a sling, sits on the grass. At his feet, Zeus lies contentedly, his tail thumping a slow, steady rhythm against the earth. A shadow falls over them. Rizzo looks up and smiles. A three-legged, scarred, but impossibly beautiful Belgian Malinois limps toward him, her tail wagging so hard her whole body wiggles. Athena nudges his hand, her amber eyes bright and full of life. Rizzo wraps his good arm around her, burying his face in her fur. The ghost of Private Miller, the weight that had defined him for so long, was finally silent. He had found his peace, not by outrunning the past, but by fighting for his future, a future with the two souls who had walked through the frozen hell of the mountains to bring him home. He had been rescued, and in turn, he had been redeemed, not by a medal or a commendation, but by the fierce, unwavering, and unconditional love of his pack. The story you've just heard is more than a tale of survival. It's a testament to a bond that knows no bounds, a love that refuses to surrender. In the coldest, darkest moments of our lives, it is often the quiet loyalty of an animal that shows us the way back to the light. Zeus and Athena weren't just trained K9s, they were family. They remind us that the greatest acts of heroism aren't always born of duty or training, but of a love so profound it can conquer even death itself. Take a moment to think about the loyalty and love in your own life. Perhaps it's a pet who waits for you by the door, or a friend who stands by you no matter what. Let this story be a reminder to cherish those bonds. If this story touched your heart, please share it with others. Let the courage of Sergeant Rizzo and the incredible devotion of Zeus and Athena inspire acts of kindness and compassion in a world that so desperately needs it. Thank you for watching.